Rated has said so many times that they are the best team in the game, and now they're starting to back it up more and more. When we entered this series, OpTic Gaming was undefeated at the Pro League. Now Red Reserve going to hand them the first win, and it starts off in fitting fashion. We go to the same map that they were actually able to serve up OpTic, a pretty big loss at NOLA, Chance.
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to Red Reserve's preparation. It was that second hard point over in the back lot. OpTic does basically the same setup every time they have the spawns, where they have two guys kind of roaming around ammo side. One guy hangs around, he's a bit of a roamer, either focusing on wine or over to help with the hill, but then normally it's one guy in the hill by himself. And Red Reserve, instead of playing for spawns, I know the casters pointed out a couple times, but they just send everybody through the single lane, and then it was just overwhelming pressure to where even if OpTic Gaming is trading out kills, Red Reserve can just keep funneling through and at the very least contest, if not break through.
You know who else does that, Chance? TK. TK is the only other team that we've seen really do that strategy. If you're OpTic, what you have to do, you have to get on that dirt road right there where Joe is coming through. Try to push up towards that field. If you're able to do that, then you have Red spawning way out. Unfortunately, they won all the key gunfights. They didn't care about the spawns. They pushed through the front, and they just were nading and weakening the OpTic Gaming players in the hill. They did such a great job on that, but again, I mean, OpTic lose another St. Marie hardpoint, and things just aren't going their way lately.
I think that it is fitting, too, that Rated did kind of compare his team to TK. They're starting to see that very scrappy gameplay come out, especially in the hardpoint. This one was relatively bloody through and through, and you can see Red Reserve getting a pretty resounding win on our first map, and now taking a look at how each hill went down.
I mean, again, you could see OpTic, they did very well, but Winery was the difference maker for Red Reserve, as we were just talking about. But Josh, this is a player we haven't talked much on. Usually we talk about Rated, we talk about Zero when it comes to Red Reserve. Josh, 35 kills, 2 minutes in the hill. A beastly performance from him.
And it's not just like the gun skill and the in-map performance, but it's the comms as well. I know he's a motor mouth, but at the very least, like, he brings that intensity, right? Like, if you have him drawn away in your ear from map one, from the outset, it's impossible to not show up, right? Like, if you got a guy like that getting everybody amped up, you're going to perform well, or at least towards the top of what you're capable of.
I have absolutely no idea what he said inside of those comms. I actually was watching with Phil. I turned to him and I asked him if it was normal. He said, oh yeah, I understand everything. I don't believe him. I don't normally believe anything Momo says, but let's take a look at map number 2. And one thing before we talk about this map in particular, this wasn't just this series that Josh really came alive. It's been all of the Pro League for me. Josh definitely being a big player to watch. But Merc, what caught your eye in the S&D?
I think actually B-bomb retakes for both teams, typically not very successful. How many times have we seen Red Reserve, you know, be able to hold off a 2v4 or 3v4, but for both teams, OpTic as well. They would plant the bomb. B, typically a player would go down, and then you would have a great setup, but both teams were able to clutch up. You saw Rated versus Scrum. That was really the big battle. They had double-digit kills when they finished the game, but Red Reserve, man, they just look so good on London Dock Search and Destroy.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta give credit, all the credit in the world to Rated, right? Like, he was untouchable for the first handful of rounds, and just the number of streaks even that got earned for the Search and Destroy is pretty impressive. And Red Reserve, you know, didn't even get all too much with it. I think they probably had one round that you can credit towards the streaks, but I don't know, it was a pretty good back and forth game. A lot of interesting moments. Karma only almost pulling off a 1v4, which that would have honestly been just like a dagger towards Red Reserve, but obviously they played incredible well. Even this final round 11, like the setup they had, it was almost perfect.
Red Reserve going to come out on top. OpTic Gaming, though, bringing it very far. They're able to pick up 5-round wins of their very own. Seth playing incredibly well. Most kills for OpTic. The real time, though, that OpTic Gaming does show up is going to be in our next map inside of the CTF, Joe. Yeah,
I mean, Capture the Flag, London Docks, again, we talked about it at New Orleans. This was a game where Red Reserve ran over OpTic, right? So, and you even heard Krim in the interview. He said, you don't want to play Red Reserve on London Docks. They just understand it more than other teams. I imagine he was talking about Hardpoint because they played Search and Capture the Flag in this series against Red Reserve. But I mean, CTF, guys like Formo really woke up. I mean, he set the pace, got a lot of streaks, and they were able to just get some relays in.
What do you think of that, though, Chance? We heard Krim straight up say that. Show the respect to Red Reserve on London docks. Did you expect to hear him say something like that?
Well, he's right. You have to, right there. At least on the hard point, I think they have like a 12-0 record or just something completely absurd. So at least on hard point London docks, that should be just like almost a permanent ban for Red Reserve, at least for like the next event or two. Either way, though, I think Rated kind of hit the nail on the head in the interview. It was a close game at the start, but then Formal, he picks up that huge three-piece in the back, and that was actually his second time getting behind enemy lines in that exact same situation. So obviously there was a hole in Red Reserve setup, but picks up a huge three-piece, gets some streaks, and then more importantly, even after that, it was Crim 6 immediately sets up for the rally cap, and it's a situation we kind of give credit to Red Reserve for their game planning ahead of time, but in game, Crim 6 is definitely one of the smartest players we have.
Crim 6 has showed that time and time again, but it was Formal who had the best KD for OpTic this time around, grabbing 23 kills. We enter that fourth map. Red Reserve bloodied up a little bit after that CTF, but they look very strong to close this one out.
Yeah, it was a little bit scary. I mean, you never want to let OpTic sort of back in the series. We talked about it for years. I mean, last year especially, if you would go up 2-0 on OpTic, you have to close them out on game 3. But they did get it to a game 4 in Red Reserve. I was a little bit worried for them. I mean, they gave up a ton of streaks, and you're going to be able to see that in the highlights. But all 4 of them not afraid to play with Mountain. I think that's so important. They're the one team that really uses that division to perfection, all of them playing with such a team game.
And heading into Gibraltar, Chance, what caught your eye?
It was just the number of streaks OpTic got and the fact that the game just didn't go their way. It seems like there's so many little details that in hardpoints OpTic just kind of gets wrong. Like, I know obviously they posted a fantastic hardpoint record the first week, but there was games against TK where literally they're breaking records and the games are still close. So obviously OpTic, they're going to be happy with their performance overall, 6-1. Like, if you had told them they were going to do that well coming into this, I think they would have been ecstatic. And I think it's important for the fans as well, or not the fans, excuse me, for OpTic to see that there are holes in their hardpoint game. Like, I think the losses are important just so they know they have things to go back and fix. But I don't know. For me, maybe I'm wrong about this, but even small things, they seem like they give up 4 or 5 seconds just when they have control of the hill. Just a bit unwillingness to either dive inside or maybe too much favoritism towards pushing out hills. But again, I think it's just the devil's in the detail with OpTic. Obviously, they are the best team at getting streaks, but still, the hill control isn't quite there.
Yeah, and at the end, we saw a perfect sort of turret set up for Red Reserve. Krim knows he has to get Joe off of that hill, just not able to do it. It was just so back and forth. Both these teams were able to break Courtyard and Castle pretty much at will. They were in the spawns. They had the spawns they wanted, but they would fight from the front. They would use their streaks. One guy would be sneaking in the back, would open up the team setups, and I don't know, man. It's typically you don't see Courtyard and Castle that even, but it definitely was in that game.
Before we even saw this series, we said, did OpTic get their wake-up call with Mind Freak? Now they have a much louder wake-up call coming from Red Reserve. Do you think this is actually something that bodes well for them?
Yeah.
As they actually do head into they're going to be able to snag that top 4 spot.
I mean, listen, right? They were 9-0 in Hardpoint before yesterday. Then they play Mind Freak. They lose both of them, but they still win the series. They may say, you know, we just had a slow series. We weren't slaying well. But now today defines the answer that, yes, they still have some issues to fix in Hardpoint. They thought it was Search and Destroy. While they did lose that one, game number 2, again, you can't lose maps 1 and 4 with this OpTic roster.
No.